This week's presentation is going to touch on three topics. We're going to start with touching back to the ways of knowing, reinforcing your learning and your understanding of those stages of cognitive developmental theory. Next, we're going to move into moral development and the stages of moral development, primarily from an Aristotelian viewpoint. And then we're going to move into adult learning theory and the implications of all of these ways of knowing, stages of moral development, and learning theories, and what they mean for adult learners that you will be working with in your leadership roles. This week we're going to start out by returning to the work of Dr. Robert Kegan. If you recall from 2 weeks ago, Dr. Robert Kegan's work focuses upon the most basic and universal of psychological problems, the individual's effort to make sense of the experience of life, to make meaning of life. Kegan suggests that meaning-making is a lifelong activity that begins in earliest infancy and continues to evolve through a series of stages encompassing childhood and adolescence and into adulthood. Kegan's work aims to show that each meaning-making stage is a new solution to the lifelong tension between the human yearning to be connected, attached, and included on one hand, and to be distinct, independent, and autonomous on the other. I find that Kegan is a gifted storyteller and an impassioned opponent of the health-illness approach to psychological distress, and a sturdy builder of psychological theory. His viewpoint is an original and distinctive voice in a growing discussion about human development across the lifespan. I'd like you to click on the link below and listen to an interview with Dr. Robert Kegan. This is a lengthy interview. It comes close to an hour, but I think if you will find it very interesting and hopefully will deepen your understanding of these stages of constructive developmental theory as Dr. Kegan explains it in his own words. Enjoy. Moral development focuses on the emergence, change, and understanding of morality from infancy through adulthood. Morality develops across a lifetime and is influenced by an individual's experiences and their behaviors when faced with a moral issue. In short, morality concerns an individual's growing sense of what is right and wrong. And it's for this reason that young children often have a different moral judgment and character than that of a grown adult. Morality in itself is often a synonym for rightness or goodness. It refers to a certain code of conduct that is derived from one's culture, religion, or personal philosophy that guides one's actions, behaviors, and thoughts. Notions of morality development have been looked at over the centuries. The earliest came from philosophers like Confucius, Aristotle, and Rousseau. They all took a more humanist perspective and focused on the development of conscience and a sense of virtue. In the more modern day, empirical research has explored morality through its relation to cognitive development by theorists such as Jean Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg. There is consensus among various authors that a developmental approach to moral character makes sense. They do not agree, however, on the number or labels of stages, and we're going to take a brief look into the authors that are listed on this slide. Scholars have debated over Aristotle's writings for many, many decades. His model, though, however, seems to be inherently developmental because he considered actual change to be based on the individual's potential and to be cumulative over time. Aristotle's ethical system rests on the assumption that the most general goal of a person's action is that of producing a flourishing and social life. He argues that ethical development proceeds through three processes: perceiving morally relevant situations, making reasonable ethical decisions, and participating in a fruitful community life. Navigating through each of these phases, Aristotle says, requires moral habituation, which produces a settled character that is oriented towards producing ethical outcomes for his or her actions. In the end of the 1950s, a publication appeared that would have a very indirect but however major influence on the development of an Aristotelian approach to moral education. Lawrence Kohlberg's PhD thesis in 1958 published the results of his empirical research on the moral development of boys aged 11 to 16. As a result of his research, he then declared his allegiance to a theory about the goal of moral development. So for Kohlberg, The paragon of moral development was an autonomous person who could justify moral judgments from an impartial point of view. The link on this page will take you to a short YouTube video that offers a rather user-friendly and easy to understand explanation of Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Please note at the end of the video they ask you some questions and ask you to answer those. That's not something I'm going to ask you to do, but probably a good thing to think about as we move through the rest of this presentation. In 1989, Sherman and Tobin published articles that talked about Aristotle's theory of virtue and his theory of moral development. They decided on 3 stages: a novice or initial, an intermediate, and then the full virtue and rationality stage. Garrett was another writer who looked at the moral status of Aristotle's stages, and he interestingly came up with 5 stages that he considered and titled them as the fully wretched, most other people, the incontinent, the continent, and the virtuous. In 2008, Christian Christensen, who happens to be a researcher at the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues, published his interpretation of Aristotle's stage theory. And he broke it out into 7 categories. And he defines them as you see on this screen, as the many, the soft, the resistant, the incontinent, the continent, and the fully virtuous. Christensen's more fine-grained analysis, breaking things out into 7 different levels, might better be understood by, first of all, looking at this scenario. So Dr. Christensen's example, for the many, he said this gentleman may have given the girl $1 if he'd been in a good mood, but he had had a bad day at work, feeling kind of blue, and said no. In terms of the soft, the example is there's a gentleman who feels compassion towards the girl, but just before handing her the money, he realizes, wow, I could be seen accosting her. This could get me in trouble, and he immediately hesitates and decides to say no. In terms of the resistant, that gentleman often behaves generously towards strangers in need. However, he recalls last night his wife's stern complaints about his spending money too freely, and so after contemplating for a few moments, he decides not to give the girl any money. An example of the incontinent would be the gentleman who would normally give money under such circumstances. However, he'd been planning all day long to try his luck at a slot machine on the way home, and he only has a few dollars cash on him. So he decides giving money away at this time is not a good idea. The example of the continent is a gentleman who's having family problems. He's in a bad mood. He does not even feel a hint of compassion towards the girl. However, being a person of principles, one of which is that he believes you should be generous, he does give her some money. And then in terms of the truly, fully virtuous, that person felt compassion towards the girl immediately, and without any need for deliberation, he searched his pockets and handed the girl the money and felt the glow of pleasure in that he was doing what he felt was right. In 2014, Wouter Sanderse published a paper that synthesizes much of the work of his predecessors who were looking at Aristotelian development. Sanderse suggests 4 stages of moral development. According to him, the many is the lowest step on Aristotle's stages of moral development and refers to people, most of whom are not thoroughly bad per se, but are all the same virtuously flawed. He prefers the term morally indifferent at this first stage, and he suggests that the morally indifferent believe that happiness consists of things like bodily pleasure, honor, money. People on the level of moral indifference obey laws or commands because they are afraid of the consequences. They act virtuously only to avoid punishment. The next stage describes individuals with a lack of self-control. These people have chosen to live a virtuous life instead of one guided by a desire for, say, wealth or fame. They perceive the virtuous life as an option to strive for this, and it is a leap forward on the path to moral virtue. However, these unself-controlled have the right moral knowledge in theory, but they do not necessarily use it and tend to follow their feelings. They can be easily overcome by desires that point in another direction. Sanderse describes the third level as self-control, and he considers that a praiseworthy stage, but certainly not the final stage of moral development. He suggests that a self-controlled person would be someone who performs virtuous actions, but struggles with the contrary inclinations and finds virtue difficult and perhaps even unpleasant. There's an internal conflict, a stress, or a frustration, and those are signals that something is off balance, something is not quite right. The properly virtuous is the last stage in the Aristotelian model, and it represents virtue in the full sense. And the key here is that it's anchored in practical wisdom. Sanderse posits that people only reach the final stage of moral development when they possess the virtue of practical wisdom, because without practical wisdom, a person may be committed to virtue in one situation, but not necessarily in another. These properly virtuous individuals consistently hit that golden mean in regard to their actions and emotions. Their life is not necessarily more pleasurable than life at other stages, but they are happy and derive joy from doing virtuous things. Sanderse cautions us, of course, though, that properly virtuous is an open-ended level, and even for the virtuous person, there's always room for improvement. If we reflect and combine what we know about the various interpretations of moral development, and think back also to Keegan's developmental theory of adult development, the question arises, do adults learn in different ways than children do? In the early 1970s, adult educators attempted to distinguish adult learning as a separate body of information from the psychological studies of learning in general. However, due to the complex nature of learning, no single theory or set of principles emerged as an explanation of how learning in adulthood might differ from learning in childhood. And about that same time, Malcolm Knowles introduced the European concept of Andragogy, a label to distinguish adult learning from that of children, or pre-adult learning, which we call pedagogy. As a pioneer in the field of adult learning, Knowles advanced 4 assumptions about adult learners. You see them listed on the slide here. The first one is that adults maintain the concept of responsibility for their own decisions, moving from dependent to self-directing learners. Second, that adults enter the educational setting with a growing reservoir of experience and more varied learning experiences than children. Third, adults have a readiness to learn those things that they need to know in order to cope efficiently with real-life situations. And fourth, adults are life-centered in their orientation to learning. Knowles later expanded that list of 4 assumptions and added 2 more. Adults are more responsive to internal motivators than external motivators, and that adults need to know why they need to know something. He saw these 6 assumptions as foundational to the design of adult learning programs and thought they could be used to strengthen the entire learning experience. He suggested that these assumptions could guide the design, implementation, and even the evaluation of adult-focused learning activities. His assumptions have been criticized, however, for their isolation of the learner from the learning context and without regard to how an individual is socially situated and whether or not they are the product of a cultural condition. Mesereau's theory of transformational learning examines how adults make sense of their life experiences. He posits that inherent in all humans is the need to make sense of or understand life's experiences. Mesereau defined learning as the process of using prior interpretation to construe a new or revised interpretation of the meaning of one's experience in order to guide future actions. Informational learning takes place when there's an increase in the knowledge and skills. The learner elaborates on existing frames of reference or adds new frames of reference. Transformational learning, in contrast, transforms individuals' points of view or habits of mind. Transformational learning will place the form itself at risk for change and focuses on change and how people know it. It is essentially an educational model for personal change. Informational learning increases what a person knows, whereas transformational learning changes how a person knows. And that's a reference from Keegan. Knowles' evolving body of work, combined with Mesereau's transformative learning theory, has laid the foundation for a number of subsequent frameworks or models of adult learning. Although no one theory can offer a complete view of adult learning, there are a number of individuals who have contributed to the literature on this important topic. And in reviewing that rich body of work, there are 4 recurring themes that seem to spiral through the work of all the various theorists. And those themes are experience, reflection, dialogue, and context. The vast majority of adult learning in schools today takes form in either professional development sessions or professional learning communities. And understanding that professional development programs or professional learning communities can focus on either informational or transformational learning, administrators and designers need to first identify the purpose. There are certainly instances in which the aim of a particular professional development program or a professional learning community focus or even a workshop is primarily informational. Some of those options are listed on this slide. On the other hand, when the goal is transformational learning, then there is a need to really pay attention to the 4 recurring themes that we've talked about. It's critical in terms of transformational learning that we allow for differences in experience, that we engage adult learners in self-reflection. We also need to facilitate dialogue, and we have to consider the social context. All of these are elements that can and do influence adult learning in our schools today. The wide range of experiences that adult learners bring with them should be an important consideration in the design of effective adult learning programs. Every adult comes to us with a personal learning history. Professional learning participants bring with them a variety of experiences that can be drawn from and can also have the potential to be valuable resources. Applying that information to professional adult learning opportunities suggests that it may be important to solicit information from participants. Using that information, we can support adult learning by consciously linking explanations and illustrations to the prior and/or current experiences of the participants. Some theorists have suggested that the experiences of adult learners might also be framed around current activities. Rather than simply presenting information about a topic, professional learning designs may be more effective if participants are allowed to experience the new information, learning by doing. This suggests that professional learning programs need to consider concrete activities that will allow adult learners to explore and experience the new concepts. This type of active engagement provides the opportunity to incrementally deepen the understanding of the participants. Now, all that being said, there are features of experience that can serve also as barriers in learning. The personal relationship of the learner to the topic has the potential to influence the level of learning that can take place. Not every participant approaches a given professional learning opportunity with the same enthusiasm for the subject at hand. In addition, the adult learner's disposition towards learning in general can serve as a potential barrier in any professional learning experience. A number of scholars suggest that effective learning does not follow from a positive experience, but from a positive reflection on the experience. When adult learners simply remember and repeat an experience, they're engaging in non-reflective learning. However, deeper learning is more likely to take place when the activities include opportunities for reflection. There is a general agreement regarding the importance of including opportunities for reflection and reflective practice in professional learning programs. Engaging in reflective practices appears to improve not only instructional practice, but also student achievement. Professional learning designs that are ongoing or continuous and embedded have the potential to support participant movement through a reflective cycle. This type of a cycle of reflection is less likely to occur in the traditional one-shot workshop model that we have seen in the past. Professional learning programs that are delivered over time and allow participants to interpret, analyze, and experiment, as well as allowing time for reflection on the experience, are much more powerful. Reflection on action is an analytical exercise that allows the adult learner to revisit experiences, create plans, and take action. It follows then that allowing for reflection on action activities can be a very effective component in continuous professional learning program designs. Reflective activities can be even more effective when they're supported by reflective discourse or dialogue. Adult learning models suggest that the learner needs to reflect on his or her experience and talk with others to solidify new knowledge. Andragogy proposes the concept of a collaborative reflective practice that she calls collegial inquiry. Collegial inquiry is a dialogue that takes place between two or more participants, and she suggests that thinking and examining an issue together is an active dialogue that moves the conversation to a level of collegial inquiry. A number of other thought leaders also advocate for professional development experiences that allow participants not only to practice, but also to engage in dialogue about their learning with colleagues. Effective dialogue, then, is not a debate, but an effort to find agreement, search for common ground, engage in evaluation, and use collective experiences to build new understandings. Creating an environment that's conducive to dialogue is an important factor to consider in professional learning designs. Feelings of trust, solidarity, security, and empathy are essential preconditions for free, full participation in discourse. Several theorists have discussed the ideal conditions for collegial conversations, and a common theme that emerges points to the importance of deep and empathetic listening. Professional learning designers can strengthen their programs by carefully including opportunities for dialogue. A number of conditions that need to be considered when creating professional learning experiences include providing the sufficient resources, posing questions that encourage collaborative inquiry, providing adult learners with data to analyze and scaffold the dialogue, provide participants with tools and protocols to facilitate the dialogue, and also to consider the composition of participants, perhaps even assigning roles to facilitate and encourage dialogical activities. Although professional learning programs can be designed and delivered in a manner that honors experience, encourages reflection, and facilitates dialogue, all of those factors must be carefully framed within the specific context of the learning audience in mind. Adult learning does not take place in a vacuum, and it is important to remember that the role of the learner is but one of the roles and responsibilities juggled by adult participants who are engaged in learning situations. The social context in which the adults work and live sets the stage for their learning, and this context can support, shape, or challenge the intended learning. The learning experience, reflective activities, collaborative dialogues embedded in any professional learning environment will take place within a particular local context, and so ideally, professional learning programs should be designed to consider the unique context of each group. Everything from the time of the day to the physical arrangement of the room, and most importantly, to consider the local culture. Not unlike younger students, adult learners possess a variety of learning styles and a wide range of comfort levels when it comes to learning. And these points should be carefully considered in the design and delivery of professional learning opportunities. In addition, we need to remember that adult learners need to feel safe and respected. Professional learning leaders need to recognize the need for a good developmental match between the program activities and the capacities of the participants. We need to avoid the trap of designing programs from our own perspective. Rather, the goal should be to understand and respect the experiences, capacities, feelings, and context of the participants. Dr. Robert Kegan compares the journey of a lifelong learner to the traversing of a series of increasingly more elaborate bridges. This analogy suggests that professional learning designers need to carefully assess the location of their adult learners on such a series of bridges. For example, first establish just which bridge the learners are currently traversing. Next, assess just how far along the learners are on that particular bridge and whether that bridge is well anchored on either side. Understanding who adult learners are and where they are in their journey as a lifelong learner will enable those who design and deliver professional learning programs to gradually move their participants to the far side of the bridge and continue their journey in lifelong learning.